Hello, George Weber here, and I'd like to talk to you about an informal assessment strategy that I call 5 cards to learning. At the end of this video, you'll understand how to use this assessment tool. You'll understand the best practices in using it, and some of the disadvantages and advantages of using it. 5 cards for learning is a series of cards like this that basically are centered around the use of short answer questions such as these. In fact, 5 cards for learning isn't necessarily 5 cards. In your lesson plan, you may choose to use more or fewer of these cards in order to achieve all the things that you want to achieve in assessing your students. As you develop your lesson plan, there are going to be places in your lesson plan where you naturally find that it's a good time to review some of the key concepts that you've basically shown your students. And here's the key to using this informal strategy. As you build that lesson plan and you come to those points, think about those key elements and ask or formulate a few short questions. I would say limit it to 3 to 5 on each card. Basic questions that are going to help underscore the very concepts that are key to that portion of the lesson. As you progress through your lesson and you reach another milestone or another point at which a review is required, there's a point to use another card with some more short answer questions. In doing this, you're going to develop a series of questions which you are going to have on your cards. And as your lesson progresses and you come to these key points, you're going to take that card, pass it around to your students, and give them a few minutes to formulate their answers, either individually or as a group. You can have them collaborate to fill in the answers. And then, as the class as a whole, you're going to review those answers to really help your students understand the concept and to ensure that you know that they've understood it. 5 cards for learning is best used in a classroom setting. And ideally, I would say in a classroom setting that has a limited number of students. If your group is too large, if you're getting to be 25 or 30 students, it's going to become somewhat cumbersome to work together as a group to analyze the results of the cards. I personally like to use this when I have a group of 12 or less, and unfortunately for me, my classes are usually of that size. When you've got a group that small, you can pair people up. Each person has their own card, but they can still work with their neighbor, or you can set them into teams to answer the questions. If the group is too large, you somewhat lose control of the discussion and it may become too time consuming. So I would say try to keep it or try to use it within lessons that are going to be targeted at smaller groups, and team the people up so that they can exchange some ideas before they each answer the questions on their individual card. So let's take a moment to talk about some of the reasons that we want to be using short answer questions. You know, using a short answer question has an advantage that it requires the student to actually recall the information that you've just presented. The questions are easy to construct, and really it minimizes the amount of guessing that a student can do. It also tests the student's ability to organize their thoughts in an effective way and communicate them. And one of the beauties of 5 cards to learning is that you can use it over and over again if you have the type of class or lesson that gets delivered over and over again. So it's not a one-off thing. It's going to minimize your work in preparing for your class, because I mean effectively the individual key points don't change if you're delivering the same lesson over and over again. So those are some of the reasons we want to use short answer questions. There are, of course, downsides to short answer questions. They're rather limited in this case. One of them is that they're difficult to score because there is no real structure that you've established ahead of time to how your student is going to answer. In this case, that's really not an issue. We're not assigning a score to these. After all, this is an informal assessment strategy. The other net downside to these types of questions are they emphasize factual information. That can be a plus or a minus. In this case, in the course that I'm talking about, or the lesson that I'm talking about, factual information is what we're trying to ensure that the student understands and knows. So when you apply this technique, it would be best to apply it when you're attempting to assess factual information. So let's spend a moment talking about the do's and don'ts of using short answer questions. First of all, let's talk about the do's. Do use your own words when you set up your questions. It's important that the flavor of your questions reflect exactly the way you do your lessons. Be specific. So when you set up your question, be specific so that there's no misunderstanding about the information that you want to have answered in that question. And use direct questions. Use direct questions. Now, how about the don'ts? When you're formulating your questions, remember the key points that you're trying to draw out in the answers. So don't ask about trivia. Avoid questions that deal with trivia. And the other thing is, keep it simple. Don't use long or complex questions. You want to boil this right down to the facts. So keep your questions nice and simple and short. So avoid long or complex questions. So that's about it. That's basics of 5 cards of learning. So just to recap, this assessment technique is easy to create. You can target it directly to assess the information that you want to assess. You're going to get direct and immediate feedback from your students as they work together and they answer this, and after they've answered the questions, you're going to be able to assess how they've actually done. Have you actually been able to get the concepts across to that student so that they each understand what they're supposed to understand? Remember that we're dealing mainly with factual information, so your course really needs to be a course that's actually instructing that type of information to use this effectively. And the one big benefit that I really haven't talked about, and I'm just going to mention now, at the end, have your students take their cards and basically keep them together, and in effect they now have their own personalized set of cold notes for the course that you've just delivered. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Feel free to use my 5 cards of learning to leverage up your assessment techniques in the course that you're delivering.